Welcome everybody. This is Eric Stiles from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and we're excited for everybody to be joining us today with Laura Palumbo, the Prevention Campaign Specialist here at the NSVRC, and she's going to be talking today about Let's Talk About SAAM as an outreach tool. Today, we'd also like to thank OVW. They're the grant that funded this presentation, and without them, we wouldn't be able to move forward with our rural project. For technical support and assistance, this is the iLink number you can contact if you're having problems with signing in or if something goes wrong with audio. You just call 1-800-799-4510. And this is how you navigate some of the features. Up in the top left-hand corner, you see an audio icon. You can mute this or unmute this for the phones, but we have muted everybody right now, so there's not a lot of cross-chatter. So if you need to ask a question, we're going to talk about how you can write in the chat box, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner, and I see most of you are already aware of that, and you've been responding well. So we're not going to be doing any polling today, so we're going to kind of skip over that. And I just want to let everybody know we are being recorded for this webinar. So if you feel more comfortable chatting a question in, please feel free to chat a question in. We might be opening up the lines later if there's enough time. We have a really ambitious and wonderful presentation today brought to you by Laura. And we would like to ask everybody to please ask questions if you need be. This is our little tree growing in the middle of the parking lot, so just park the question off the side and we'll come around to it as soon as we see it. Thank you. So first off, we'd like to ask everybody in the room, if you could identify in the chat box, just type in if you're an advocate, a medical personnel, law enforcement, prosecution, technical assistance provider, or other. And if you're other, just write that in, please. Okay. And at this point, it looks like everybody's starting to answer. And while everybody answers, I'm going to talk about the importance of taking care of ourselves. When we talk about child sexual abuse, even in the peripherals, we know that it can bring up some triggering concerns for us, and it can bring up some strong emotions. So we ask you to take care of yourselves. So after this webinar, if you have questions or concerns, please call us, talk to coworkers, have questions, but do what is needed so we can do the wonderful work that we do. And at this point, we'd like to review the answers real quick. It looks like we have more advocates in the room. So I'd like to thank you all for answering, and I'd like to turn it over to Laura.
Thanks for that great introduction, Eric. I'm going to start again by mentioning my role here at the NSVRC. I'm the Prevention Campaign Specialist, which means that my primary role is coordinating the Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign. And that's kind of like, you know, the Christmas time period of our work for folks that are doing either sexual violence prevention or sexual assault services. It's really a prime time for outreach, and so that's going to be kind of the frame that I'm approaching this presentation today with. And I am going to start by giving a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. And this is our agenda. We're going to start the conversation with just some pretty simple ideas about outreach that I think can help us to all feel like outreach is something that is approachable to our organizations and to our work, no matter what your staffing capacity looks like. You know, that there's just some simple ideas that all of us can consider and implement to strengthen our outreach efforts. And then I'll be going over some tools for outreach, and then we're going to be talking about finding your voice, so either your organization's voice or the voice that's kind of apparent in your community where you're doing outreach, and using that to bolster your efforts. And then I'm hoping that we'll have some time to share, because I think that that folks that are participating today probably have a lot of really helpful information to be offering others, especially given that as rural grantees, you have communities with very unique needs, and you know, some of those needs and some of those experiences can overlap and be a source of support for other folks working in rural communities. And then we'll finish up with questions, but you are able to park questions or send questions through the chat, and we'll try to get to those as we go through the presentation. And welcome again to everyone, and thank you for participating today. So we're going to start with some of our simple ideas, just kind of exploring what is outreach. And we have a little poll here, and this is just kind of to get a feel from where folks are coming from in the space today, whether outreach is something that's currently a focus. So we have 3 kind of tiers here, and maybe you're in one of them or maybe you're somewhere in between, but is outreach a key priority for your organization? Are you growing your outreach efforts, or do you kind of are you looking for more support and resources around outreach? And if you could just answer A, B, or C in the chat. And what is it looking like? Let's hear in some folks. Okay, looks like folks are identifying, again, across the spectrum. Some folks connecting with that in-between area of B and C, maybe really having some great goals for outreach, not really sure where to begin with implementing them. Some folks are identifying outreach as a key priority. So really, we're having folks that run the gamut. And I'm hoping that no matter where you are in your outreach, that there'll be something helpful for you to take from today's presentation. When it comes to talking about outreach, I think one of the simplest ways, and I'm saying simple in such a positive way, because I think that sometimes, we can overthink our work we can overthink our lives in so many different realms. So I'm thinking simple is as a really positive approach. And I think the most simple way to think about outreach is that outreach is bridge building. It's building a bridge between your organization, your resources, what it is you're offering, and your audience/community. So the people that you would like to come in and access your services, or the people that you would like to be working towards reaching with either your message or with an educational program. So it's kind of acknowledging that there's a gap and trying to take some steps towards meeting folks where they're at and hopefully bringing them on a journey with you. It's creating a path, it's fostering a connection, it's bringing people into your work and into your cause. And outreach is also a little bit of risk-taking, but it's important to know that this isn't, when we talk about outreach as risk-taking, it's really exciting because risk is an essential part of growth. And outreach, to a certain extent, is going out on a limb, and it's important to reach out in a way that connects with your community and audience. So, of course, we want to connect with people, we want to reach them where they're at, we want to say things in a way that they're going to hear them, but outreach is also about stretching that audience. So where do you want them to go? And so for folks that you may want to engage in accessing your services, it's not just about them knowing what the number to call is, but how can we get them to dial it? Or, how can you get the parent that is in the classroom where you're sharing some information to maybe think differently about how they're talking with their child? So it's, again, taking those steps, which sometimes stretch you as someone who's conducting outreach to bring your audience and yourself to a new and stronger place. And so with this in mind, effective outreach may require stretching your organization too, and it may require leaving your comfort zone. And that's also something that you may be asking of your audience. I think a lot of times it's very easy to get caught up on what folks are going to get hung up on, what people are going to tune out or what they're not going to hear. But sometimes that step is so essential, is to kind of push past what's comfortable. And outreach is also about vision. What are you trying to build or break down? What's your destination? If you have a clear vision, it will be clear what tools will get you there. So in addition to to being visionary and having a big picture vision for your outreach, it's also important to have either small goals or maybe a specific focus. And I think that those small steps will really be what gets you towards that big vision. I think at NSVRC, the big vision of our outreach is creating a future without sexual violence. And the folks that are here believe it's possible, but we also believe that it's not a small goal. So we have small projects and special projects and small steps and partners and collaborators and all of these little pieces that come together that are bringing us towards that big vision that we see as a part of our outreach. And again, when we're talking about both that big picture and then those small steps, some of the really key things to be thinking about when you're planning outreach is to be thinking strategically. And some of the, I think the kind of really key thoughts and ideas to be thinking strategically about are your goals, your audience, your messaging and tools, your capacity, your partners, and then measuring your impact. And I'm going to be just, quickly, when you're talking, we talked a little bit about goals already, but thinking about what you want out of your outreach. Are you looking to recruit volunteers? Are you looking to change the dynamic in your community? Are you looking to get more youth involved? Are you looking to outreach to men specifically? Your goal is very unique to your organizations. Maybe it's current plan and vision. It could be unique to your organization's deliverables. It could be unique to your organization's staff capacity. But having those goals really are what move any work you're doing forward. And then when we talk about audience, it's who you're reaching out to. And I think the most important thing to know here is to really validate that you are often the expert of your own audience. You are a member of your community. You are, in addition to wearing your hat as an advocate or a person in law enforcement, you're an individual that's a part of the general public just like the rest of us. And so, knowing what makes sense to the people in your life and, the people in your community is often simpler than we think. And then there are lots of more formal ways to learn about your audience too, and that could be doing a focus group or a community needs assessment, but it could also be as simple as reaching out to a partner that recently conducted an awareness campaign and saying, did schools respond well when you did this, campaign? Or, there's so many different ways to learn more about your audience and to become better at connecting with them. And then when we talk about messaging and tools, that's really what you're sharing in your outreach, whether or not it's using a campaign that's already been developed and tailoring it to what you know about your audience and your goals, or whether it's really, using your knowledge of your audience and resources to create something very specific for that audience and to achieve those goals. And what I'll be sharing today in later parts of the presentation are how the Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign can be used as an outreach, as well as some other tools that are geared towards folks working in rural communities. And then it's also important to consider capacity. And I say this with the caveat of it's really important to know, what is feasible and what is realistic given resources and staff capacity, but knowing that there's something that you can do at every single level. So just because resources are limited and because staff capacity is limited, I really think that you can make the most out of what is available to you, no matter where you fall on that spectrum. And that's something that we'll be talking more about later as well. And one of the ways to do that, and one of the ways to kind of, no matter what your capacity is, grow your efforts, is to involve partners, to collaborate, to be a friendly voice when it comes to outreach, that that it is able to kind of get other folks sharing your message too, because that is amplifying your voice. So who in your organization, or not in your organization, who outside your organization could be a partner? Could it be a public official? Could it be another community organization? Could it be folks from a different field? Could you, maybe for the first time reach out to medical professionals? Or, I think that there's really the sky's the limit when it comes to partnerships. It's really about where you're willing to, invest, your energies and maybe take some new steps. And then measuring refers to the steps that we take to evaluate. And so being able to kind of track some of that work that you're doing. So if you, decide to be involved in a campaign or to run a PSA, being able to track, did calls increase? Did website visits increase? Being able to see, if you're working with a school district, being able to have focus groups with, the students that you're reaching out to. So being able to kind of follow up with the efforts that you've made or the efforts that you're making to know how best to move forward, to give yourself clarity on what steps you can take in the future to have even stronger outreach efforts.
If I can ask a question, I know often in rural areas there's the idea, you mentioned the idea of focus groups at the end to see where you move forward. Would you suggest that in the beginning as well, those focus groups to listen to your audience and find out where your messaging should target?
So there's really never a bad, focus, if you have the ability to reach out to people, there's never really a bad way to incorporate focus groups. You will always, always, always learn. As a matter of fact, I think one of the most awesome and sometimes overwhelming things about working on a project like SAAM is that anytime you incorporate new voices, whether it's by sharing an email or having a meeting or doing some intentional measured outreach like a focus group, you're going to hear things that you didn't think you were going to hear, and that's, that might affect your direction. It might not be the feedback you wanted to hear, or it might really, be that one small, small statement that's a really big idea that shapes something huge. I can think of so many meetings that we had where, in kind of planning our messaging tools and resources where someone says something off the cuff and it becomes our slogan for 2 years in a row, and it's something that grows into something so much bigger. So focus groups are a great way to really measure reach, but an awesome planning tool as well. So that's a great point, Eric.
Thank you.
And focus groups can also be, they can be big productions and they can be small productions. They could be, they could be phone calls and they can be informal. And I don't know, and I would never discount the value of any sort of feedback that you're reaching out for. So if it's, that you're at a luncheon with partnered organizations and you just want to pick everyone's brain about something, that's not a formal focus group, but you are going to learn, and that's going to be feedback that can potentially have a really positive impact on your plans. And now we're just going to move forward with talking about some tools for outreach. And as I mentioned, I work on NSCRC's Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign, but SAAM is also something that is much bigger than NSCRC and is just, is a force in our movement and in our country, outside of the movement. It's something that really has a great history and tradition that gives it a lot of power and traction throughout the country and world. And so we're going to be talking just a little bit about what is SAAM. And to kind of hear again where folks are out, gauge the spaces that we're at in the room, I'd like to hear from folks if they've participated in SAAM in the past. And so again, we have a spectrum. A, I plan SAAM activities, so I got it, we're doing it already. B, I participated before, but maybe haven't been in a planning role. Or C, you're ready to learn more, maybe haven't been as involved in planning anything specifically for SAAM, but that you're here for a reason. So if you could just answer and submit responses to the chat. It looks like we're hearing some folks that are ready to learn more and in that C category and to learn about SAAM, which is great because if there's anything I'd love to talk about, it is SAAM. And so just as a little bit of background, what or who is SAAM? And we say who because as we refer to Sexual Assault Awareness Month by the acronym SAAM, it's pretty often that people think we're talking about a person, especially in side conversations and stuff. And so we sometimes joke about SAAM being a person, but SAAM stands for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and it was first nationally observed in 2001, but that is in no way representative of when SAAM activities first started. SAAM happened in a grassroots way as a part of this movement. It happened outside of the month of April. There was certain points where it was for full weeks in April, and then as more voices started participating, folks decided to get organized, decided to kind of take all of those efforts and concentrate them into the space. I think it was at first a week in April and then into the full month of April. And for the past over the past decade, it's been observed on a national level during the month of April, and it's got the symbol, which you can see in our little Sexual Assault Awareness Month logo, of the teal ribbon, which is often used to represent the movement to prevent sexual violence, and what SAAM promotes is prevention and awareness, and it happens through events, advocacy, outreach, education, media, and so much more, and that's all stuff we'll be talking about. And as the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, around when the campaign began to be observed at a national level, we've had a role to really to take feedback from the field to create resources and unique campaigns each year to serve as tools for folks that are interested in having outreach for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So each year we choose an annual theme with feedback from the field. We do surveying to kind of become a source of direction for that. We identify a day of action each year, and we conduct surveys for that as well. We create resources that are available in English, and for the past 3 years we've also had resources available in Spanish as well, which is was a really exciting project for NSVRC to take on when we began hearing a lot of consistent feedback that folks did not have English-only audiences. Their audiences had a number of language needs, and we were not able to meet all of them, but we did hear consistently that there was a great desire for Spanish language resources, and so each year we've been trying to grow that component of our campaign. And we also share logos and media, so those are the visuals that can kind of, just like the teal ribbon is this sort of universal symbol of work in sexual violence prevention and sexual assault awareness, we can also kind of, if using consistent logos and visuals for the Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign to build on that foundation. And we also provide training and technical assistance, which you are all wonderfully participating in today, so thank you. And you're able to also reach out to the NSVRC either through our website or resources at nsvrc.org for follow-up assistance and for information about some of the tools we'll be sharing today. And as that is our role, we are happy to help out as best as we can. And we also create promotional products. What we found was that folks that are in the movement and in the field really, when you're tabling at events or when you have kind of one opportunity to be either visiting a school or in your community, you kind of want to leave folks with a takeaway, and maybe a takeaway that isn't a flyer or a fact sheet. And so there's a lot of interest to be using promotional products, and so NSVRC, in addition to some of the other topics that we survey on, we ask folks for feedback around certain products that they think will be engaging for folks, and we research a lot of different products and and brand them to match the kind of Sexual Assault Awareness Month logo and branding. And then those are resold at cost, so that's not something that the NSVRC makes an income off of. And often they are available to folks at a better rate because we're able to buy in bulk quantities. So that's another part of our role. And then increasingly each year, part of our role involves social networking. And that's something that kind of, was a new effort in 2011, and then by 2012 it kind of just felt like SAAM was born to be online. Online has become a really huge part of how NSVRC does our outreach, a really effective way of using our resources and staff energies when it comes to the impact that we're able to have. And so we do offer a lot of our opportunities to promote and participate in SAAM online. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go on too. And so to tell you a little bit about this year's campaign, SAAM 2013, it really is building off last year's Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign theme, which was our first healthy sexuality theme. And so I'm not sure if folks are familiar, but SAAM 2012 was It's Time to Talk About It. And it was a campaign that was built on promoting healthy sexuality because, that was a topic that we were hearing from advocates that they wanted resources on. They wanted to be able to kind of positively frame the conversation. And it's really based on the simple idea of if we think about what the opposite of sexual violence is, it's healthy sexuality. So how can we promote the healthy behaviors, healthy attitudes and actions that we want to see in order to create, a family, a school setting, and a broader society where sexual violence is not acceptable, where it is not a norm, and to be able to kind of foster those positive behaviors and skills. And so that is also the line that we are continuing with SAAM 2013, and this campaign not only looks at healthy sexuality, but it really it looks at engaging with a focus on children. So what we're talking about is how we can support the healthy development of children, and how adults have a key role in that. And the big vision of this is really a vision to change the conversation. And when we talk about our work in general, I'm sure this is not news to anyone that is doing work in this field. It's often a conversation that shuts folks down. It's a big silencer. It's really hard to get folks to talk about sexual violence. It's hard to get folks to talk about sexual assault. And we really, we really wanted to encourage people to start talking about it, and we really wanted to change that dynamic and to open up the conversation. And as much as, and there's almost a certain extent to which our society doesn't, we talk about sex in a way like you see sex when you go to the grocery store and are checking out because it's, on the cover of every magazine that you walk past and check out. But, are we really talking about sex as a society when it comes to the information that we're sharing with our children and loved ones, or when it comes to a dynamic in a partnership? Sex may be expected. Is sex something that's being talked about? And so we really had a vision to create dialogue, to open up the conversation, to encourage people to use their voices, and the way that we have hoped to do that with both Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaigns in our It's Time to Talk About It family are to use positive framing that engages audiences rather than negative scare tactics and messaging. So really focusing on the positive. And I think another really great example of this is, I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the rural PSA that NSVRC created, but one of those posters has a tagline, and all it says is, "Your voice is powerful." So taking that idea that everyone can do something, that everyone has a positive role that they can play, and that we can end silence around sexual violence. We can engage our communities. We can change this dynamic, and really invite folks into a conversation that has the power to change our communities. And so the tagline for this year's campaign is "It's time to talk about it." So I was being very literal when I said we're trying to get folks to talk about it. We're putting it right out there. We want you to talk about it. And to those that may not have caught the hint at the wording of it, we have these great visuals paired with it as well. We have our clock, our speech bubble, and our Prevent Sexual Violence ribbon. So it's kind of, again, reinforcing that message that, the time is now because it's never going to be an easy conversation, or the time is now because it may never be something comfortable, or you're never too young or too old to engage on a certain level in this conversation. And then specifically, this year's campaign has the slogan as well: talk early, talk often, prevent sexual violence. And this is where our focus on kids comes in. What we're really targeting our adult audience here, and kind of hinting at what our call to action is. And it's whether you're a parent, or you're a community member, or you're an advocate, you have the job to talk early and talk often about child sexual abuse prevention, or supporting healthy kids. And that talking early, talk often can happen directly with children, but it can happen with adults too, because we're not talking about it enough. That is kind of the, no matter who the audience you're bringing in is, we're making progress because it's conversation, and it's breaking that silence. I'm just going to go back real quick, and this is the language that we use for the Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign. And in completely separate research and planning, this is where we landed, but NSVRC's rural campaign that I mentioned before, which had a number of planning and research components to it, kind of landed with a very similar slogan of "let's talk about it." And I think that what you'll find is, again, we didn't end up there by accident. That is really, that direction is something that I think, again, having that positive engagement, bringing folks into the conversation, really is a great way to reach the goal of educating, broadening audience, bringing, building awareness. And so that we'll be talking a little bit more about that campaign as well, but you'll notice all those tools are labeled with "let's talk about it," and again, it's about having those conversations. So this April, it's time to join the conversation, start talking about healthy childhood development to prevent child sexual abuse. And this is just, again, one of the ways that we are, this is a visual we created for social media to, again, try and translate some of what some of what our goals are in the focus of this campaign, which is, again, healthy sexuality and child sexual abuse prevention, or what it takes to promote healthy kids and healthy environments for kids, and how adults can support that. And I talked a little bit about the slogan already, but again, this is to encourage adults to support healthy childhood sexual development, because the role of children is to be children, and I think that it's very unfortunate that sometimes in our work and in our outreach to children and our efforts to support children, the role to protect children is put on children, and that is the role of adults. Okay, as adults, it's our job to be supporting children, to be supporting the environments that our children are in, to be challenging, to be challenging other adults who are seeing unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy behaviors, and then to be a source of support for ongoing healthy development. And when we talked earlier about outreach being a little bit of risk, with this campaign, we did not take on an easy task. are asking folks to think outside of the box. We understood from last year's campaign that healthy sexuality and sexual violence in general is not something that is an easy conversation for folks. There's a lot of cultural silence built up around sex. There's for our even within our movement, so many folks were really excited to see that healthy sexuality resources were being offered, but a lot of folks were it was a challenge too. It didn't come easy. It was really asking folks to reframe how they were thinking about sex, and that kind of challenge is again present in this year's campaign. So we're asking how can adults and communities play a role in child sexual abuse prevention and in ending child sexual abuse. And and I think that a way to make bridging that gap a little bit easier is, when we talk about our campaign or when you're implementing our tools, we try to break it down into the ideas that are much more accessible for folks. So kind of like the simple ideas that come together to really embody what it means when we're saying support healthy children. So those are the following: open communication. So having conversations, whether you're a parent or you're a loved one of a child, or you're an adult that sees an adult that is acting inappropriate, being able to to have those open conversations and to use your voice in a meaningful way. And then healthy boundaries, which is something that adults can, a value that adults can share with children and teach children, but it's also something that adults can model. It's, being an ally to healthy boundaries means that I don't expect any child in my life to, to have to take a hug from me. I can offer them a hug and I can offer them a high five, and they can refuse that, and I can empower them to say that that's where their boundary is. And that's a big, I said that like that's an easy conversation, but we get that that is often for families a really, a challenging, value, because often it's so forced that children have to give this aunt or uncle a kiss, or children have to give this aunt or uncle a hug. But really, modeling positive behaviors and teaching children body rights is so important, and again, is so essential to their healthy development, as well as for children that have experienced sexual assault. Extremely empowering to them as they continue on and grow into healthy adults. And it's also a lot about information sharing, and when we're talking about sharing information, we're talking about sharing age-appropriate information. So the information that's age-appropriate for a 2-year-old that's behaving a certain way, maybe not, maybe rejecting their clothes, or, versus the sort of information that's appropriate for a 12-year-old is very, very different. And so in the resources, we kind of outline what the different ages and stages look like, what information is appropriate, what you can really emphasize and share at each age to support healthy development. So it might not be essential for a 2-year-old, or it may not be appropriate for a 2-year-old to know very specific information about sex, but it's important for them to know the names of their genitals. And that's important when it comes to, on so many levels, but when it comes to for them to be able to embrace and acknowledge their biological and physiological parts, but it's also important when it comes to their boundaries and when inappropriate behaviors happens, that they're able to identify that penis and vagina, and not using terms like ladybug or euphemisms in their reporting. So it's really important to encourage those skills. And then it's about being supportive adults and encouraging other adults to be supportive too. So whether that's having a conversation with the grandparents or the babysitter or with the head of the PTA, it's being able to share this information and share an attitude that supports children. And supporting healthy children is also about empowering survivors, so that adult survivors of sexual violence and sexual abuse, as well as children that have experience of sexual abuse, know that there's a potential for a healthy future, and these are some of the tools that can help get you there and can support you on that journey. And these are how people in your life can also support you. So, you know, what you can do as parents is experience sexual violence to be able to really support and promote your child having a very healthy future. It's hugely empowering and information we're excited to share. And it's also about engaging bystanders, because so often adults, you know, when we think about how often child sexual abuse can happen in the context of, you know, team athletics or in a school setting, and you know that there are other adults that are maybe seeing red flags, that are maybe seeing things that concern them that they don't think is appropriate. And when that kind of overall culture of silence tells people not to listen to that inner voice, tells people not to challenge an authority or take a risk when it comes to those feelings. And so what we're talking about is, you know, as an adult, you should not only should you feel empowered, but it is your responsibility to talk to challenge an adult that you think is behaving in a way that is unhealthy, or to be involved as a bystander when you see something that you're questioning. And overall, it's about supporting safe environments, because children and adults, we do not exist in a vacuum. We exist in the settings, and they can either set us up to thrive and to grow in a healthy manner, or you know, they can be settings where unhealthy dynamics are fostered. And so what we can all do to promote safe and healthy environments. And I know I spent a lot of time going over this list, and that is very specific to NSCRC's SAAM campaign, but this is what all of kind of the tools, this really, I'll mention what some of our specific resources are, but this is really kind of the lifeblood of the campaign and what it's exploring.
Can you speak to how maybe these tools are used in rural areas? Can you adapt them?
Mm-hmm. You know, I would like to speak to that, and we're actually going to go into some of the specific tools and where they're available, and I think I'll go over that as we go on. So thank you for that question, Eric. And just so that folks know, resources and support are available. All of the resources are posted online. Every year we do a mailing as well. And the mailing includes a CD-ROM that has all of these resources on it. And if you contact us, we can send you a CD-ROM. And for some folks, that's an easier way to be able to access and print the resources. But they're also available online. And just as I was mentioning when Eric asked his question, this is kind of the specific tools that are created. And they include an overview on healthy childhood sexual development. So that's really a large tool that goes over in depth some of the topics that I was just discussing, as well as we broke out who our target audience was and created a resource for each specific audience. And that included community members, parents, and then advocates, educators, and preventionists. And so when it comes to using these tools in rural communities, it's really, you know, we've tried to create as blank of a slate as possible, and it's, you know, it's about kind of knowing what works very well with your audience and what kind of message will have the most traction there. So I think that there's a certain extent to which, you know, you're your own best ally in your knowledge of your community, whether you're in a rural setting or an urban setting when it comes to implementing these tools. But I think that they are highly adaptable and can really translate well in a lot of settings. And then in addition to some of those specific resources that I mentioned that are, again, focused on supporting healthy childhood development and preventing child sexual abuse, NSCRC creates a number of materials that are more about general awareness and how to participate in Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and more generally about sexual violence prevention. And that's what this list represents. And so we have a general tool for Facebook and Twitter, and so that has daily post for you to use on Twitter if your organization is active on Twitter. It has some conversation starters for Facebook, and we've included in that document, you can find ones that are specific to the child-focused theme, but you can also find ones that are just a little bit more general about raising awareness and engaging an audience. And we have a listing of event ideas for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is a really fun tool. It's been kind of growing for the past 5+ years, each year us adding more and more events to it as kind of certain, like, I guess new topics come up, new events come up. So in the past, it was really, and it still is, folks are hosting things like 5Ks for SAAM, but in recent years we've seen people hosting Zumbathons, or a new movement is the Sweat Lot movement. So that's kind of an idea that we've added and updated to the list as well, and that just has some pretty. It's a listing that it covers the breadth of the different events and gives you a few ideas for how to approach each one. And then we have customizable SAAM proclamations that you can use, and these are a cool way to either engage a community leader or to be able to say in a public way why your organization or you as an individual support Sexual Assault Awareness Month and why Sexual Assault Awareness Month is important. So it's pretty much saying that sexual violence and sexual assaults affect everyone in our community, and and this is what we need to do to change this. And there's also a sample letter to the editor that you can use and share during Sexual Assault Awareness Month that has a great, it does relate to this year's child-focused theme, but it does a really great job of translating all of that information into something simple that adults and parents feel like they can be involved in and support. And then we have some tip sheets, and these tip sheets are again the more general SAAM tools, and they relate to creating a campaign. So this is kind of a great piece if you are really interested in getting schooled on outreach, really learning where from a planning perspective to start, kind of the step-by-step process of creating and implementing a campaign. This would be a great tip sheet for you. It goes through, I believe, 6 or 8 steps from planning through implementation, and just gives you some really great steps to consider. And then we have a tip sheet for partnering with youth-serving organizations, and this is new. It did grow out of this year's theme, but it's not specific to it. Even if you're not focusing on child sexual abuse, you can be partnering with youth-serving organizations, and that can be a great way to involve volunteers. That can be a great way to reach new audiences, and what are some great approaches to that. And we also have some general tip sheets about sexual violence for parents and caregivers, and one for healthcare professionals. So if that's an audience that you've identified as a target, or someone that you've been trying to partner with or reach, those are great tip sheets there. And then we also make available, again, all of the campaign visuals and slogan. And these are some of the products that we have available for 2013. We have stickers that are in English and Spanish, and they can be filled out. That's what you see at the bottom with respect written in. And those are really fun, a great way to engage folks. So it's something that people can personalize. It's a very inexpensive handout. It's something that you could say, have a social media component to, say, post your picture of your It's Time sticker, and something that we found is a popular product this year. And then we also have these dry erase boards, and you'll see the front of this one has SAAM 2013 written on it. But on the reverse side, we actually have a full bilingual fact sheet on healthy sexuality tips. So that's a pretty cool resource, and it has a fun front and an informative back. And then we have some notebooks that are with the Sexual Assault Awareness Month logo, and those are 40% post-consumer recycled. And when it comes to participating in SAAM, there's a lot of different ways to participate. The day of action, which I mentioned when I was describing NSCRC's role each year is just kind of one day that we identify for folks that are looking to coordinate events on a national level. And so this year the Day of Action is Tuesday, April 2nd, and this is the second year in a row that has been the first Tuesday in April. So we're going with the first Tuesday in April because I think it's going to be hard for folks to kind of kick off the month on a Monday. And this day is not the exclusive day for SAAM events by any means, but it's a really great opportunity to participate in social networking events. It's, so it's a good day to pop online and to update your Facebook status, change your profile picture to kind of get folks centered in on one day in April. But it's also a great day to know that if you're hosting a legal advocacy day or an event that others are going to be hosting events that day too. And you can also participate in SAAM by sharing a letter to the editor, as an individual or as an organization, by sharing a proclamation. Denim Day happens every year during April, and it's a great event that encourages folks to go into the workplace wearing denim to raise awareness about sexual assault and sexual violence prevention. And you can learn more about Denim Day at Denim Day in LA, like LosAngeles.org. And there's a really great story behind that project as well. Take Back the Nights are a really popular event that happens very often in communities with college campuses. So it can happen in a number of communities. Again, a lot of people are getting active for SAAM, so if you have a passion for that or have a community partner that might, it could be a walk, a 5K, Zumba, clothesline projects are an example of like a creative or an art-based activity for SAAM that has folks creating visual art to represent either their experience or experiences of loved ones. And then there are, again, I mentioned each year there are new events. In recent years, walks have been really popular too. And that's kind of a controversy within our movement and work. But for some people, it relates to, to their vision and their approach, and it works for them. And there's also events like speak outs and poetry slams, and that's again another creative way to be engaging folks. And as I mentioned before, SAAM is very active on social media. We provide Facebook photos, status updates and photos. NSDRC has accounts on a lot of different social networks, but we're really active on Facebook and Twitter during SAAM. But we're also on Pinterest and Instagram. And this may be a little overwhelming for folks that don't use a lot of social media. It seems like there seems to be a divide about folks that are super engaged with and have really jumped on the bandwagon when it comes to using social media, and then for some folks that it's not necessarily been something they've implemented, or there's a lot of overwhelm when it comes to implementing it. And so no matter where you are in that spectrum, whether or not your organization is actively on Facebook and Twitter, and if they are, you can find ways to engage, but maybe you're just an individual with like a Facebook account, you can say you wanted to change your profile picture to the Sexual Assault Awareness Month logo. We have some tools for you to be able to do that. And we have, again, as I mentioned, a resource with daily tweets and daily posts for Facebook. And each year we have been hosting Twitter chats during April. And this year those Twitter chats will also be happening on Tuesdays. So for the second year in a row, we'll be doing Tweet About It Tuesdays on Tuesday afternoons in April, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, that for some folks, especially folks in rural and underserved communities, social media can be a really great way to reach a broader audience. It may be more effective if you're not necessarily in a region where geography, where geography is a barrier. It can be a great way to connect with folks. We're on YouTube, and we'll have a SAAM video available and have some videos that we share. So if your organization creates a video, you can feel free to share it with us, and we'll add it to our YouTube channel. We also have an online events calendar that serves as a kind of a national listing of Sexual Assault Awareness Month events. And so if you go to NSDRC's website and go to our calendar, you can add your events, and that then becomes viewable to anyone nationally who accesses our calendar, and can be something that we are able to help share and to promote. And as I mentioned, our SAAM video is currently in production, but it'll be out in April. And so if you frequent the NSCRC website, or if you're friends with us on any of our social networks, you'll probably see us, starting to hype that up soon, because we're very excited. And if you're more interested in SAAM, I am one of our staff bloggers, and I write a weekly blog about Sexual Assault Awareness Month, campaign tools, about prevention strategies, kind of an ongoing conversation, because as much as NSCRC is kind of, as much as April is a time that our efforts are really bolstered, we know this work happens year-round, around the clock, and that we always need to have a really active energy for supporting our outreach and awareness. And if you're trying to find where these resources are here, and this is the SAAM website, and this is what it looks like. And if you go to NSCRC's main page, there's always going to be, in the right-hand corner, a Sexual Assault Awareness Month logo that you can link to, or you can go to nsvrc.org/SAAM with 2 A's, and that'll bring you here, and you can access this year's campaign resources under current campaign, or you can go to the resource section and find resources on other campaign topics that we've highlighted in the past, and those include bystander and campus, the healthy sexuality resources from last year. There's some general tips and tools for planning that might be helpful. So again, this is a great resource if you're just looking to learn more about SAAM, or if you have something specific in mind. And now we're going to talk about some outreach tools that are specific to rural communities, and really highlight the NSCRC's rural campaign and PSA. And we wanted to get started by hearing from folks if they're familiar with Let's Talk About It and rural PSA tools. And if you could just add to the chat if you A, currently use rural PSA tools, B, looked into these in the past, or C, are new to the NSCRC's rural campaign. So it's looking like these tools are new for some folks, which I think is probably pretty exciting, maybe exciting for Eric too, because you can share more about those tools. Yeah, so a little bit about the Let's Talk About It campaign. And do you want to do a little bit of an introduction, since it seems like folks are new? I know I'm putting you on the spot, Eric.
Sure. This is the campaign that we have on our website, and currently you can contact us at nscrc.org, and there's the rural campaign projects that you can link to. And this campaign was put out a year ago, and it was designed to get the conversation started in rural communities where there has not been a conversation about sexual violence. We do know that talking about sexual violence is very difficult, like Laura said earlier, and that in communities where everybody knows everybody, it seems like, or your family's very large, or you just know the family down the street, it becomes more difficult often to talk about sexual violence. So there was a campaign created that was developed to focus in on the positives instead of supporting myths. And we were trying to find a way of actually ending sexual violence and moving forward and getting people to have the ability to have survivors come forward. So that's where this was given birth to. So it's Sexual Violence Thrives in Silence. Let's talk about it. To break that silence gives voice not only to survivors that we know need voice in the work that we do, but also to the people around that can support those survivors and actually end the cycles of violence that we do see in communities.
That was an awesome introduction, Eric. Thank you. And again, so that's the tagline that you see up there, Let's Talk About It. And unique tools for unique communities, and it's a part of the Just Rural project. And when NSCRC was developing these tools, we were really involved with reaching out to rural communities, and that's where everything was tested and focus groups were conducted, and getting that unique experience and input. And if folks want to add to the chat, if you have any feedback about the rural campaign in PSA, I think that our team is just curious if it's something that you've attempted to use in your community, or if it's something. So it looks like Anne's writing in. One of our movie theaters is running the NSVRC Rural PSA with our agency's tagline before the movie starts a couple hundred times now through April. That's really awesome, Anne. That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. And we wanted to kind of give an opportunity, and if anybody else has something to add to the chat about about these tools or what it's looked like to implement them in their community.
And while we look at some of the answers, these are some of the posters that we have, but there's also a PSA that was mentioned earlier that is on our website, and this is the link, nsvrc.org.store, that you can find the products, but you can also, since you're a rural grantees, contact me, and we'll help you walk you through the process of downloading the PDFs or the files and helping assist you with the posters or the PSA campaign.
Yeah, and so these posters are just beautiful, and as Eric mentioned, they're not the only component of the campaign. There's a number of different products available, and a really great short PSA. I know that a lot of times when folks have the opportunity to share a PSA, like you hear from someone maybe say your local theater, or you have an opportunity to air something. It's often with very little notice, and they're asking for something that's really short, and so it's really it's a 30 seconds, right?
With the ability to add your agency's name as well and contact information into the PSA as well.
So a 30-second PSA packaged and ready to go that you can personalize with your organization's information, and it can be a really great tool if you if you have the opportunity to be able to share something like that. And I believe, is there a radio?
Yes, there's a radio
version as well. And I know that sometimes folks will reach out to us a little bit overwhelmed because they have a really exciting partnership opportunity that they weren't expecting, but they don't have the opportunity to develop their own materials for it. So again, a really great resource and that's available.
And with combination to this, there's also another webinar that we have online that illustrates how you can do the rural campaign and how it gives you some pointers on working yourself through it. And at that point, if you still have questions, please contact us.
Yes, that's a video that you can find on our website or on our YouTube channel of a great presentation that Kelly did. So finding your voice is about what makes effective outreach, and that's really what I really like to highlight is how that is unique to you, and again, your knowledge of your community. And we're going to have another poll, and so this poll is going to be asking you to kind of consider some of those outreach goals that we talked about. And so if your organization has identified a goal for outreach or a goal around your SAAM activities, would you say that it was planning events and activities, promoting services, community outreach, volunteer recruitment, prevention education, or legal and media advocacy? So if folks want to share that in the chat as well, it's really great to get an idea of the different directions that folks are taking in their communities, and to know that there is really great strategies, tools, and resources available no matter what your goal is, but that it should look different. Your activities should look different depending on your goal. And so it looks like some folks are identifying E, so prevention education. A lot of folks are saying C and E, so community outreach. A, planning events and activities. Yeah, those are I think if I had to kind of identify the sort of things that people really identify as key with SAAM, it would be community outreach, education, and activities. Those kind of how do I connect with my community? How can I teach my community? How can we build awareness? How can we promote prevention? So it does sound like that's the track that folks are on as well. And when we're talking about what makes outreach effective, I want you to kind of consider a few things, but consider identifying what fits best with the work that you are already doing. And again, I think we're coming back to our simple ideas, and we're hoping that these are simple ideas with a big impact. So connecting the dots is an important part of playing to your strengths and capacity. If you know that your capacity is somewhat limited, it can feel really daunting to recreate the wheel or start from scratch, but you don't have to. We can do more by building on inroads that are currently in place than we can by starting from a completely new place. So I think when it comes to outreach, you really need to think about what's already in place, and that's such a great place to start. So say you have an outreach goal of engaging with more men in your community. What partnership do you already have in place that might support that? And so it's considering that. It's considering, what men are on your organization's board that might be really invested in that. It's kind of being resourceful when it comes to the tools that are already in your toolbox, and giving yourself a break when it feels like you can never do enough, and just seeing what you have that you can build on. Because I think that again, we want outreach to feel like something that is feasible, that is within within your ability to approach, and is a worthwhile effort when it comes to limited energies, because you have to make the most of what you're able to do and what you're already doing, because resources are not infinite, time is not infinite, staff capacity is not, and so this is kind of what are your current strengths, knowing what they are, knowing the work that you're already doing, and how thinking of those aspects as launch pads when it comes to outreach as assets.
Can you speak to how sometimes rural communities have close-knit communities, and those informal resources can be a benefit, not just the formal for your agency? So friend of a friend, or Boy Scouts, or other groups that you might know in your community, might be Rotary Club.
Yeah.
Tied in together, different roles.
No, it can be so limiting when we think about all of the kind of the more official opportunities, or kind of the more structured partnerships. But really, there's, again, so much can be said to reaching out to people informally, as partners or as volunteers, to be taking advantage of the close-knit aspects of your community, and knowing that, knowing who has, who can be a voice and a source of support, and kind of looking to build on that communal nature, and values of support, and build on that work.
Thank you.
And what does the conversation look like in your community? This is another important question to consider. And again, when I ask this question, I am considering you an expert on your community, because it's where you live, work, and spend your time. It's where, maybe it's where you're raised. I think that we can never undervalue our knowledge of our environments, or our communities, and of our setting. And so how does the knowledge you have of your community and audience, how can it be key and effective in your outreach? How do locals speak and connect? What are the core values and shared values that you can connect to? So what's important to your community? And when your community talks, what language do they use? Is it the same language that your organization is using? Or is it maybe new language? And if it's new language, is it accessible language to them? So the big kind of one of the big phrases that we use when we're talking to other organizations about Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2013 is healthy childhood sexual development. And that may not be the sort of phrase that you want to be, that might make sense in your community. So how can you translate in a way that does make sense? Talking about healthy kids, how can you simplify and translate your message? And this is such an important way when to be thinking too when it comes to adapting tools and resources. So, with a tool like the NSCRC's Rural PSA campaign, what can you add to, or how can you market or share that tool in a way that has more traction with your community, that relates well to things that are valuable to them? Do they value, is neighborliness a strong value? Is that something that you want to, reach out to and encourage? Or is, teamwork and team athletics and, sports culture, is that something that you can kind of build on? And just, knowing that kind of intimate knowledge that you have of your community is such an asset and can really make your outreach more effective. And then another thing to consider is, if we're thinking again about that bridge, what's missing and what pieces are in place? So if we think about outreach strategy like a puzzle, it's important to identify the missing pieces and the challenges too. In order to bridge gaps, they need to be identified. So, it's just as much as it's important to know what your strengths are. If there's an area that's going to be a barrier, it's good to know that too. And then you can kind of strategize to how to effectively approach that, or to know what, if you have, say, a barrier to your community around the religious community. So say, there's just a lot of, that seems to be kind of a source of silence, or, has in the past been a barrier. What's a partnership that you can make that works for bridging that gap? Who's someone within that religious community that is an ally that can help you share your message in a way, or how can you adapt your message in a way to make it more inviting to that audience, knowing that we are about meeting people where they're at and then encouraging beyond that too. So not about compromising when it comes to your messaging and tools, but really, taking those steps to be able to create a message that gets heard and a message that stretches people.
If I can add, the pictures and imagery you just saw in these last number of slides have all been for the Rural Project and the Rural PSA, and we did a lot of investigation with these images, and what we found was the missing pieces. The conversation wasn't discussed in a way that was non-threatening. We found the message in the community was responsive to the idea of this is what our community looks like. They need images to see likeness in themselves, but also we didn't talk about sexual violence in such a way that was a barrier to ourselves. So we didn't have images of small children or adults who looked like they've been victimized. We had a very positive side of the message that we started talking about. Let's talk about it right now. So the images and the concepts have all been illustrated through this. I just wanted to point that out for the audience.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Eric. So this is, as Eric was mentioning, from one of the posters. And to me, nothing says conversation more than coffee at the diner. And I didn't grow up in a rural community. I grew up in North Jersey. And there is a diner on every corner, but that is where conversations happen. And that's where those serious talks happen. With family members and with loved ones. And so even I found this to be something that was so easy to relate to, because again, it wasn't, an image that kind of created fear or sadness. It's something that's kind of upbeat and engaging. It's got a brightness to it. It's got a life to it. And I think that that's, I think that more and more folks are finding that that's the best way to reach audiences, because you have you only have such a small opportunity when it comes to, the time to share your message. Do you want to turn folks off to your work, or do you want to turn them on to the possibility of engaging and being involved? And so I think that positive approach is really great. And now it looks like we do have a good amount of time for our sharing session. And this is a session which I'd like for us to focus on. How do we bridge the gaps? Because again, outreach, as much as we've shared some simple ideas, and I feel like we've really focused on strengths-based positive approaches to effective outreach, we can only bridge gaps when we identify them. So I think that that's what I'd like for us to focus on. And we have one more poll in this section, and that is, how can this group support your SAAM efforts? And if you want to add your answer to the chat, we have Do you think that sharing event examples, outreach ideas, planning strategies, resource sharing, what is going to be a good source of support for you? It looks like we got quiet in the chat. All of the above. Thank you, Dawn. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm hoping that folks that are on the webinar still might be able to jump in on the chat and to be able to kind of help, again, share with one another. Because you know, we've had a space where we could explore these ideas, and you're welcome to use this as an opportunity to ask questions. But I think that, you know, I've shared where my expertise lies, and that there's some more expertise in this webinar space that I'd love to explore. So a question that I'd like us all to consider are, what are the biggest opportunities and barriers to outreach in your community? And if you want to jump into the chat and kind of share what you perceive to either be a big opportunity or a big barrier, or maybe something that's a little bit of both, and kind of post that, and then maybe we can see if there's some things that are coming up consistently for folks, or if there's some ideas that are we're able to generate.
I know that one of the barriers that gets discussed often in rural areas is distance and transportation, and that can also be an opportunity if you use possibly a mode of communication that would get to people if they're in their vehicles. So like the radio PSAs is very useful, that we found from some of our rural grantees using the rural PSAs as the radio. So.
Okay, it looks like Dawn has added to the chat as well. It says, people willing to participate / flip side, many folks don't want to talk about or acknowledge this problem in our community. So I guess the opportunity is the people that are willing to participate, but the barrier being kind of not wanting to talk about or acknowledge that this is a problem in our community. It's too scary for it to be this close to home. Like, you know, I think that that's often, you know, something that occurs in a lot of communities, is that people, they want to support awareness, but that just doesn't happen here. And silence around that can be a really big challenge.
And in talking about that with children, in particular, you have this the fear of it not wanting to happen to our children, but the need to protect our children and work with our children to make a safe space. So that's an opportunity as well to start in that avenue. How can you help assist and work with your children so that does not take place? So there's the flip side that you can start off, especially talking with children.
And it looks like some other barriers have come in, but I think one way to kind of approach the barrier that Dawn mentioned is sometimes we need to remind our community that as much as sexual assault is something that impacts us all, and that is something that is closer to home than we'd like to think, it is also not the end of someone's story, and that there is a really important story of resilience and of empowerment that we are also able to share. And it is about, you know, it's about survivorship and kind of, you know, what does it mean, you know, how empowering does that feel like as a community member, that I can be an ally to someone's experience of healing or of growth, or that I can support, you know, because I think especially with especially with child sexual abuse, I think, you know, there's a fear of, you know, children becoming broken, but that's not, you know, I think that's not how advocates see it at all. It's just another opportunity for growth and for healing. And how can we engage people in that story, I think could be something worth exploring. And it looks like Foresta has added to the chat as well. Some barriers: rural isolation, definitely transportation, lack of places where people gather in rural areas, lack of access to online resources, and lack of access for non-English speakers. And those are serious barriers. Those are, those are very serious challenges because they all kind of speak to accessibility, accessibility and isolation. And I think that that's definitely something to consider. I think that sometimes what we can hope for is that there isn't, so for someone who transportation may be a barrier for, if technology is not a barrier for them, so if they're maybe not is able to access transportation, but they are able to access online resources, that can be a great opportunity if that's the way that your organization conducts outreach. But it's unfortunate that sometimes some of these really significant barriers, maybe it's transportation, technology, and language access, when that's grouped together, that really becomes a tremendous effort to bridge, because it's about it's about not only translating your work, but really how are you able to bring it to someone. And so I think that in a situation with those considerations, it's really important to try and build a network of partners that can kind of maybe can be a support for each sort of each area of weakness and each need for growth.
And off from what you said as well, when you talk about the idea of working with those barriers and find those inroads into those communities, often you think outside the box, and some of the rural grantees have made partnerships with religious organizations, with places where individuals do still group, even if they have transportation concerns or language barriers. If you make inroads into some of these organizations that do focus around that, you can really have a lot of impact. And it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of communication and bridge building to find different individuals and different organizations, but it means thinking beyond the box. It's not going to be the standard organizations. And sometimes that also means finding organizations like law enforcement that might go into some of the rural areas where there's language barriers and tribal areas, where you can find a county sheriff that can actually support your work as well.
And it looks like we have, thank you for that great answer, Eric. Another comment from, it's either Rosea or Rosella. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name. Lack of resources, transportation, how to engage folks in the problem of DV, SA, and stalking. So I think that, again, as Farista mentioned, those kind of, those access barriers, but as well as when we do have access to folks, how do we engage them on topics that are, not necessarily easy topics to talk about? And I think that that's finding the opportunity in your message. So are you better able to reach your audience by talking about DV, SA, and stalking in a traditional sense, or is it better to talk about promoting healthy families, kind of starting with a positive inroad to be able to make that initial connection and then be able to further explore the topic as well?
And often what you're saying as well is we find that in different cultures and communities, sometimes the conversations would take longer than we wish. I know that if I could have my power, I would end all sexual violence right now for everyone around the world. I can't do that. And sometimes we feel rushed in the work that we do because we're advocates or we're law enforcement, we're going from one case to the next. But realizing that these conversations take a while. So you might take 5 steps back to actually maybe talk about what this organization or this group of people you're talking with, where they're coming from, understanding, and then working forward to maybe parenting, and then working forward maybe into sexuality, and then getting to sexual violence. These conversations sometimes take longer, but what we do find is that the more stability you put in these early on conversations, the more impact and the sturdier your outreach efforts will be for down the road. And we also know that if you only have a few individuals in your organization, those individuals should all have some part in the conversation, because if I'm doing the outreach and I'm the only person in my organization doing this outreach, when I leave, because I will leave my job at some point, that outreach goes with me. I'm the only point of contact. So building stable communication and stable outreach by many conversations with multiple people is very important, because what you're doing is you're marrying cultures. If you think a lot about our families, when families get married together, they always say the families get married. It's not just the bride and the groom. The families, the in-laws have to find some common ground. So that's what we're doing. We're to find that common ground between two families. If you can frame it in such a way that doesn't seem so scary, sometimes that helps.
I think it's a really great point, Eric. And I'm hoping, thank you for those that shared some barriers. I'm hoping that this exercise can kind of become a source of encouragement and strengthen that, that there's, possibly, with every challenge, a possible opportunity as well, and kind of what some of those examples are. And just to kind of offer, I'm going to misquote it, but there's a great Mother Teresa quote, and even if you can't feed everyone, you can feed one person. And I think that that's something that for all of you that are just working tremendously hard in the face of some really, really considerable challenges, like take some encouragement that, every positive step or every outreach effort that you are able to make has an impact, and you can never underestimate the value of that impact, and you are doing really, really great work. And to kind of close out this section, this is the poster that I mentioned before that uses the tagline, "Your voice is powerful, start the conversation." I'd love for folks, if they have something to share, just to be able to share what your experience has taught you about outreach.
And we realize that we're running close to time, so also at this time, we'd like to open up if there's any quick questions anybody has at this point. But we really want to thank you so much for taking part in this webinar. We know it's important work. We will have this webinar on the online space down the road, recorded, so you can come back to it. But please reach out to either Laura Palumbo or myself, Eric Stiles, at the NSVRC if you have future questions, because we know this is our starting conversation with you doing this work, and we really applaud you for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so again, thank you all for participating and for being involved. And if anyone, I do think we're getting close to closing out the webinar, but if anyone has any questions that they'd like to share through the chat, or if you would like to submit a question to Eric or to resources@nsvrc.org, we'd be happy to follow up, and really appreciate your participation here today, and hope that there is some some information to support your outreach efforts. And we're really so glad to know that so many folks in rural communities are so excited and energized to be participating in outreach and Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, have a good...
yeah, sorry, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry.
So this is some of the URLs we mentioned. Again, you can stay in touch with NSVRC on Facebook, Twitter, even on YouTube, or by the phone. We have a phone number too. It's on our website. I didn't list it up here, but and you can also get updates at the SAAM blog. But again, thank you so much for joining.
Have a good day.